It's your guy, the people's champion, Amp Brown.
DL Cummings here.
This is Ronald Tracy Robinson.
I am an advocate for Black nationalism in the community.
I am the chair of the Libertarian Party here in Duval County.
This is a collaborative effort between the Black nationalists and the Libertarian Party to see how we can connect a bridge to do proper outreach to the African American community, specifically in Jacksonville, Florida.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome back. This is Political Bombcast coming back once again. My name is Ronald Tracy Robinson. I am the pragmatist of the group. Over here we have
People's champion, Anthony Brown, 1/3 of the Political Bombcast, representing the Red Lions for Justice shirt. We look for you guys to come to the town hall meeting September the 6th.
And then in the center we have
DL Cummings, the chair of the Libertarian Party here. And also, as you may have seen from previous episodes, the token of the group.
Absolutely. And we have an esteemed guest today. She is going to be the first guest of our podcast. And we want to welcome Miss Linda Hart Streeter. And what she is a relationship strategist. So what I want to do is allow her to take the floor and explain what she does and what her business is about and how vital it is to bringing communicative skills to the African American community and how we can mend these relationships that we have in Jacksonville, Florida. Take the floor, madam.
Alrighty, thank you so very much. It is my esteemed pleasure to be with you guys today. So thank you for the invitation. But yes, my name is Linda Hart Streeter, or Dr. Linda. You can call me. And I am a life and relationship strategist. It's what I call myself. And that was earned through many hard times and relationship as everyone else has been through. And what I do know is that relationships are fundamental to who we are. So I spent, after a second divorce, I spent quite a few years returning to school. So I started to study psychology, and from that, marriage and family therapy, by the time I got to graduate school. And then I did my doctorate in Christian counseling. Since that time, I have worked with the court system. I started out with the Florida Supreme Court as a certified family mediator. And then from that, having lived out in Arizona, my most recent state before Jacksonville, I worked as a counselor mediator for the Arizona Superior Court. So I have sat before many people. I come from a place of education, but not just that, but personal experience of my own, as well as there's scores of people who have sat in my office as it relates to relationships and conflict, and I find some common threads across them all. And so since that time, I'm also a published author. I've written a couple of books that I'll share. One is called The Art of Manifesting Love. This book here was pretty much birthed out of the fact that everyone is looking for love, but no one seems to know what it is.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so here it gets kind of pragmatic, with some great information on helping us to further define what love is and what is it we're looking for when we say we want love. What do you want? I just want to be loved. But what does that mean? And what we find is that everyone is looking for love, but no one is willing to become the love that they're looking for.
And so you have a book there called
And
The Power
then
of Conflict.
this book here is called The Power of Conflict. And that particular book was birthed out of doing so many mediation with couples who were either splitting up or divorcing. And this is pretty good. I'm really, really proud of that work, because not only do I give 12 strategies, practical principles for resolving conflict, I kind of integrate those with the spiritual laws that governs the universe.
Absolutely.
And when we learn how to harness the power that we have spiritually, that changes everything, changes the dynamics of conflict, So here we address conflict, what it is, why it's beneficial, hopefully, that people will start to discover that conflict is not your enemy, but it's your friend. I was speaking at a conference a couple of weeks ago with a group of ladies in Charlotte, and that was one of the things we talked about. Conflict is really your friend.
So you believe that, on that vein, before we get into the questions, do you believe conflict is more of a feedback mechanism in order for, pretty much an opportunity to build the relationship to the place where it needs to go?
Absolutely. That's how you grow. You don't. We've heard over and over again that you don't grow on the mountaintop. The growth came from climbing the mountain.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for that insight. Gentlemen, do you have anything you want to follow up with her in that before we go into the questions?
Not at the moment, but I'm sure we'll have some stuff to dig into.
Definitely. And one question What is the difference between a relationship strategist and a relationship counselor?
Well, I am a counselor. We hear that all the time. And I think what I was doing there was it's more of a user-friendly word.
Okay.
When you say therapy and counseling, people, there's a stigma with it.
Yeah, it's kind of a bad connotation.
It's a bad connotation to it. So I do coaching. But a strategist is really one who, if you think about any strategist, it's about providing strategy to succeed at whatever the strategist is. If it's economic strategist, that means they're good with number. They show you how to strategize when you're using number. So here, for me, this is about how do we maximize who we are and the power that we have in relationships. So it takes strategies to know how to do that.
Yes, indeed.
So with the stigma, since we're talking about relationships, and we'll just kind of keep this with the more typical heterosexual relationships, which I assume I already know the answer, but I just want to kind of get confirmation or revelation. Which gender or which sex tends to be? Is it men that you still find, or do women equally have this view, the stigma about the use of the term therapist?
No, I think that women probably are more apt to get counseling or therapy. And what I find that even with marriage counseling or relationship counseling is that in most cases, the woman is the one who's seeking the resources and trying to drag him in as opposed to. So I think women probably will seek counseling first. Yeah.
Definitely. And the first question that we have here is, what is the mission of your practice? What is the mission that you set about when you started your business?
When I started out, the mission really was centered around how do we create healthy individuals and healthy families? And that is really the mission. Because when you have broken families, or, it's because you have two broken people who started this family. And having sat in church much of my life, and having gone through a couple of divorces. The first time I was married, I was really young. Shouldn't have been married anyway. I was like 16, okay. You know how to, in our time, you got pregnant, you got married, okay? Right. So that tells you the era I'm in. And of course, you're too young for a baby. You're certainly too young. You're not mature enough. Your brain has not even developed to that level yet. And then went about 8 years and got married again. And this time it was like a babe in Christ. And the church way is that you come in, God said you're my husband, wife kind of thing, and people get married. And they don't know one another. So looking at the dynamics of the culture of the church, my personal experience, and then even being in that, back to the dynamics of the culture of a church, it's like we need to be taught. And life skills, for instance, is something the majority of people haven't gotten life skill.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so back to even as we were speaking earlier, with a lot of young guys, they're trying to be grown-ups, athletes, they maybe earn success, but when it comes to being a parent and, father, husband, there are no skills for that.
Definitely. And
so that's what drove my practice there.
That's essentially what you said about the culture of these institutions, such as the church. It's supposed to be teaching children coming up and young men and women, for those that they want to set up for marriage within the house of or in the body of Christ, about these life skills. Do you believe that there is a disconnect with the churches and actual courtship?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because
the church doesn't believe in courtship.
Right. And do you believe that is contributing to the lack of... We're going to go into more about marriage rates, but do you think that goes into the lack of positive outcomes within the church when it comes to relationships? Because once you go into the church, and I grew up in Living Way Christian Fellowship Church on Pearl and Tallulah. I grew up over there. The pastor was Anthony Spate. And I've seen many examples of people getting set up with this person and that person within the church. But the problem is, it's only when you're in the church where you're in the culture of the church. But when you got into the world, there's not really anything you're equipped with to reinforce those principles that are set about in the church. And so here you come with this mission statement of bringing actual courtship as that filtering point between, and the strategy aspect of, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to have these financial literacy. You're going to have any type of barriers. You're going to, going to go around any kind of, what do you call those, not barriers, but criteria that you're going to meet within this marriage. Do you believe that what you're doing is going to bring that back ultimately?
I do believe that the more people can grasp the concept, I think that we're still living in a culture where everything is faith, but people forget that faith without works is dead. And you can have all the faith you want that this is my husband or this is my wife, but when it comes to the actual working of a relationship, God is not going to do that for you. And so, we hear in all things and all thy getting, get an understanding. And we also hear there's a scripture that's, where we're to get knowledge and get an understanding, because without those, you don't have what you need. In the face or in the environment of a counselor, nations are saved. So if it was just our faith that says, okay, you're my husband, I'm your wife, what if neither one of us know how to manage finances?
Right.
What if you have trauma you're still dealing with, but you never talked about it? Or I have trauma that I've never spoken about that prohibits me from being the wife or you being the husband that you say God called you to be. So I think people have a tendency to get married. It's blind. They talk about blind faith, but this is past that. It's one thing to believe God for a spouse of your choice, but it's a whole new different thing to know what to do with that spouse once you get them. So there's a huge disconnect when it comes to the church because, I always say that church is so concerned about you fornicating that they don't give you an opportunity to date and get to know the person and get the skill set you need that you can have a successful and a healthy marriage.
So I got a question. It seems to me, and correct me if I say anything that you disagree with or you think I've just kind of missed the mark, but it seems to me like my grandparents, people in that age, like the boomers, if you will, they equally came into marriages ignorant of many things in the same way that many of us today do. No matter, I'm 45, but when I was 20, I was pretty ignorant about many things. And I feel like 20-year-olds today, many cases are ignorant about some of the same things that I was. And then my grandparents, when they got married, they were also pretty ignorant about things equally, like for the most part, right?
Right.
So what's different? Because it seems like the older generation did a better job of staying married.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I have a tendency when I run into someone who's been, because I've been married twice, okay, but I have a tendency when I meet couples who have been married for 40 and 50 years, 60. Some I've met some married longer than I am old, and I always ask that question: what's the difference? What would you say now, and what is more acceptable now was not acceptable then. Okay, so we have emerged in a society now where there are a lot of norms that people find that are unacceptable. We have more opportunities. We have more open doors. So if you go back to your grandparents or me going back to my parents who, are in their 80s, 90s, you will find that they didn't have the options that we did. So what they did was stay together. It doesn't mean it was perfect, but a woman was less likely to leave her husband then because of the stigma of being divorced and the lack of opportunities presented to her. So chances are she's going to stay. And it was more of the hierarchical type of relationships where regardless to his behavior, there was this whole concept that the man is the head. So what's different now is that's not the buy-in anymore with life and relationships.
I'm glad you said that because this is a good segue question that I have for you. I think that's one variable, but I think there's a lot of different variables from particularly the Black community where I felt like you had more support I felt like you had more resources in the community. And I feel like the church, in terms of its ideas, is a little antiquated. My question would be, from your professional expertise, do you think that should be more incorporated as a preventative mechanism, as opposed to now we're in the marriage, now we need to have counseling, versus institutionalizing some of these concepts that we're talking about today, whether that be in school, whether that be in church itself, where we can sit down and people can actually have these conversations, as opposed to now we're just going to, like you said, live on faith on the back end, as opposed to us having these real open conversations now. Because I do think it is different. I do think sometimes getting out of a marriage may be incentivized, whether that be alimony, whether it be child support, whatever it is. I do think also some women feel like, I have more options. I don't necessarily feel like I need to be in a marriage that's going nowhere. But I would make the argument, why do we even get married if we haven't done our due diligence, our homework, we haven't vetted that person, whether it's the man or the woman? I just think to have these things in place in our community, sometimes we don't necessarily have them. And I just think that to have that in play, for me personally, I'm going to speak for me personally. There were some things that were said that you look for in a woman. My sister, there were some things that was said to her that you look for in a man. I don't necessarily know if I took that advice per se. But I just think that everybody is kind of looking for the bag. Everybody's just kind of doing things individually. I don't necessarily know if you still have the same onus on marriage at the same time too. I don't know if I'm off the mark on that, but I don't necessarily think that I think that people still want to get married, but I don't necessarily think that you had the push that you had probably 40, 50, 60 years ago. Say, look, we need to get in this relationship and you need to get married, particularly if you're going to, like you say, get pregnant. Then it's not a good look. The optics of it is not necessarily the best or whatnot. But I went all around the house to say that I think we should have things more institutionalized prior to the person get married, that I think that would be, a little bit beneficial. What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And that's the problem. That's one of the things that I've pushed since, over 20 years ago now, when I made my transition, because I recognize where the church as the institution has failed, has failed greatly. What we have had are pastors who, and this is not to put a pastor down, but I've learned firsthand experience that they recognize their calling. Whatever their come to Jesus moment was, they had it. And they said, I'll do what you say do. If it's to pastor church, I'll pastor the church. But does that make them skilled?
See, the thing about that
to
is
offer people what they need? Absolutely not. And then the institution has not provided those skills.
I wouldn't say the church has failed. I say just flat out failed in general. Because since church today is not really an institution to uphold civilization, it's more of a commercial enterprise. That's more or less.
So you're going past the relationship now. You're just saying.
No, because I'm talking about I'm talking about why relationship today haven't been made on the bedrock that it should be made, is because the institution doesn't prioritize it. Yeah. Like me, for example, I was telling them earlier today, I'm not of the Christian faith. I am a Vaishnava Hindu, and within that, there are a set of principles that you have to follow anyway, bar none. Like one, just certain things you just don't do. Like for one, there's 4 regulative principles that they call it. No meat eating, no intoxication, no sex before marriage, and no gambling, stuff like that. Once you become initiated and become what they call a brahmachari, or what in other circles would be called a monk, and you live a life of immediate spiritual discipline and purification process of renunciation.
You from Jacksonville?
I'm from here, okay. Born and raised,
right.
yeah. And
Indonesia?
No. But first you got.
No, I really like what Tracy is saying here, because that's the point that I make. I live from that space now. I talked about the spiritual principles here.
Exactly.
And I think the church is the one place that doesn't have a life culture,
It's
a
a place-
principle set of place where rituals that you must practice. Most religions, like Islam, for instance, they have a set of principles that they practice. The church doesn't have. The church is all by faith. You pray, you read the scripture, and God forgives you.
And
you
good
get
luck.
up.
Good luck. Yes, but there is no, like you say, there is no framework for devotees
There are no
or
rituals.
people of the congregation, or no rituals to follow to remind yourself of who you are in your conviction of this faith that you're supposed to be practicing. And with like I was saying, there's a place of renunciation that you have to go through in your
Right.
purification process. You renounce the things of the world. Like for example, in our faith, we have many what they call idols, but they're not idols because they're just images that you have to put up to remind yourself of who God is and who you pray to and who you are. That's why God comes in many, many forms.
Thanks
you
for
can-
clarifying that.
Right. They're not idols because what we call idols today are what we follow. Like we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Everybody follows Thor, Captain America, all this type of stuff. Black Panther, exactly. Political figures, athletes, actors, all this stuff. All of those are idols because these are fallible human beings, just individuals that we put on a pedestal because the television told us to.
Right.
But as opposed to having more images of what God is in his manifested form to keep you on that centered path of spiritual culture and development. So by the time you even get to marriage, you went through what's called the brahmachari stage. And I think a brahmachari is for women, but a brahmachari for men, you live in the temple and you know how to conduct your household. You learn how to work, how to give classes, how to read scripture, memorize scripture, and all this type of stuff. So by the time you get married to someone else who is a fellow devotee, just like you are, and not someone that's in the world, not how Raven Simone said Watermelon Andrea, you know what I mean? Then you're gonna be all right because both of y'all came from the same system and that same institution that brought y'all together. Because falling in love for me, and correct me if I'm wrong, falling in love for me is not the tingly feeling you have when you see someone, the butterflies fluttering, things of that nature. More than likely that's gonna get you messed up. But for me, falling in love is falling in love with God, and whatever God gonna bring you from that perspective, everything is gonna fall into place after that.
Trey, I just wanted to add something too, real quick. Regardless of whatever your religious affiliation is, I think sometimes we lose the fact that you can still have a code of ethics within a community.
Yeah.
Meaning that I will not touch my woman. I will value her. I will not throw trash on the ground. Those things are an extension of whatever your religious beliefs are.
Definitely.
In addition to that, example, as a rite of passage, sometimes the Bernstein Bears go through a rite of passage once they turn 13. That's a part of their culture. So the expansion of some of those things from a relationship standpoint is something that needs to be emphasized too. In the Christian faith, we are throwing stuff on the wall in some cases and hoping that it sticks. But what helps that is the greater kind of reinforcement of laws and what I call codes of ethics in a community that make sure that those relationships are still grounded. Whether it's people walking through the neighborhood, making sure people don't get snatched out of the community, those things, from the context of a relationship, they foster stronger relationships because now when it's time to get together, we've seen these people, reinforce and keep the community together because they have these code of ethics in place. So whether you're a Muslim, whether you practice the Hindu faith, whether you're a Christian, the whole nine, the extension of the community still is up under the umbrella of what I call a code of ethics too. And these are some of the things, that you just don't have in some of these communities. And if you had that, I believe you would have better relationships too.
Most definitely.
Oh, definitely. And even churches would be stronger at producing healthy families. But there is no such. And again, that's where the church has failed at because, like code of ethics usually going to center around the spiritual aspect of who you are. So it's not just having faith for salvation, but it's so like, I always think about Jesus who said that he does as he see his Father do. And so he mimicked what love was. So love doesn't put its hands or her hands. She's a female, by the way. she multiplies, but she doesn't put her hand on anyone.
We'll get there.
Because she, if you were to see people from the eyes of God, if you were just taught that, and that you are the love that you're seeking, because if you were created, if you believe with the Creator that you were created in His likeness and in His image, it means that you have the same godlike character. It's there. People don't realize it's there. Essence, love, ability to create the life you want. You have everything God had. You were created in His likeness and is in His image. So if I were to, piggyback on what Jesus said, then if that is the case and I understand that, how would He handle? Am I doing as I see my Father do? And He was a God of love, and we know that. And I don't care what religion, because I've read a little bit of all of it. But you know what? They all center around the virtues of God. Love, respect, connection, appreciation. Folk have not been pushed enough for giving codes on this is how you treat people. So you take it where everyone just showing up on church and religious. You know why you have so many schizophrenia young people and children around? Because they've seen people talk about God in church and come home and live a nickel worth of nothing. So that's where the confusion comes in at, like, is He really real? What is this we're doing? So I think that, back to your point you made, both of you, and it's very important. Folks don't know what they're supposed to live by.
Another thing about love is, for me, love is a duty.
It is.
It is is something that goes beyond physical attraction, or whether we're having good communication or vibing or having a good time. It's a little bit more than that. That's why I say love God first and foremost, and then everything that's after that, then it'll be reassured. And in spite of how attractive she may be, because those looks are going to fade. The looks from me are going to fade.
They will for everyone.
It's going to fade for everybody. So, because today I believe that marriage is pretty much just someone that you like having sex with right now, and then you live with them, because we're pursuing instant sense gratification. I'm pursuing instant sense gratification for myself, and I want to try to find somebody else to follow it as well. And then we're going to be selfish amongst each other. And then we're just going to have, just practice carnality and illicit sex until something happens and oopsie baby comes out, and then we just kind of work our way around it.
Absolutely. And think about it. And I'm going to go back to the church, because that's the edifice I grew up in.
Because I grew up in where we say, we talk about, don't do none of this stuff until you get married, all this type of, all that kind of crap. But the message changed because they wanted more members coming to the church for some reason.
Well, I think that one of the biggest problems is the fact that, without being given a code of ethics and life skills on how to live, and if the church's goal is to prevent you from sinning, then marriage becomes this thing, get married so you can have sex. And they quote the scripture that says it's better to marry than to burn. But forget everything else you need to have a quality relationship, but at least this is going to save your soul. Right. And that's what's pushed oftentimes, that people get married in such a hurry without the skills and the tools that are needed to have a successful and loving relationship.
So I got two things here. First and foremost, ladies, if you're watching, this man right here that's saying all the right things, he's totally available. Maybe not to you. I don't really know. That's something y'all have to work out, but I'm just going to throw that out there. Number two, I'm actually kind of concerned by this conversation. So
why is that?
We're saying relationships have faltered. They're kind of broken right now. We're also saying, hey, the church has failed. So you've got to, let's assume that there's a young couple that's watching right now. If I'm that young couple, I'm saying, oh, well, relationships have failed, or they're largely having problems, and the church is largely to blame. What hope do we have if we're waiting for the church to get its act together? So until that happens, what's the answer for people if they can't rely on their church and they still want to have have a relationship, get married? Maybe their idea is long term. I would love to grow old with somebody, but maybe they're not ready yet. and they don't know they're not ready, or they don't know in what ways they're not ready, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So what's the answer for somebody in that situation?
I think that's a beautiful question that you asked there, because it's one that, and it goes back to what I do and why I do the work that I do. And, we know statistics show that 50% of marriages end in divorce. And the latest results also show, and I don't have the percentage right off of my head, but the marriage window has decreased. People are not getting married now. They're finding it more convenient to live together. And maybe that's that hopelessness that you are talking about. I have a nephew, my sister was telling me, her son was like, he's been living with this girlfriend for about a decade now. He's not going to get married because he didn't see any successful marriage, so it's just better this way. So people are already there where you are with that. But I warn them to think about their consequences. Every decision you make is going to cost you something. So this may be more convenient for you to live this way, never get married, but what is this going to cost you later as you age? And you need that support. So what do? We have to educate ourselves. It's not up to the church to do it for us. And as I like to say to young people and older people, when your life is broken, seek help, seek advice. There's the church itself, you have to recognize what they're able to feed you that you can grow from, and what you need outside of that. So your life, your resources don't all come from one place. That's why there's such diversity in the earth. God set it up that way. So your church may be able to pray with you and, encourage your faith, but you may not have anyone qualified in that church to do premarital counseling with you. They can give you the spiritual aspect for it. But one of the things that I do with my practice too, is that I do premarital counseling. And this really great because these are research-based assessments we do. One called SYMBIS, Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. There's another one that's called the Prepare Enrich for people who are married. But we need information. And what I would say to anyone who is skeptical about marriage or not sure if it's going to work, what I've learned, people will spend thousands on a clutch this big, or a pair of red bottom shoes, $50,000 on a wedding, and invest not $1 toward the marriage itself.
Interesting point.
So what that means now, we have to invest in things that we know are going to be profitable for us, that appreciate with life and not depreciate. Your relationship is something that should appreciate. So for the person who's hopeless, you don't have to be hopeless. All you have to do is work on becoming your best self. And as you're vetting for a spouse, the more you know yourself, the better you're going to be at that process. You know what to look for. And so things like getting help in the programs that I offer, you got 12 dimensions. It discusses conflict, how to resolve conflict. That's a simple problem. It sounds simple, but do you know many people don't know how to resolve conflict, because conflict is about anger, shouting, fighting, or, talking harsh to people. And that's not what it is. It's differences we share. So, what's your conflict style? What's your communication style? You have avoided. You're in a relationship with someone and you can't have any important discussions because they create things to avoid. They don't know how to have those conversations, and it could same be if they're a runner. They run away from the situation as opposed to facing that, So there are things we need: communication, intimacy versus sex. There's a big, so all of these things that we have not looked at. And not only that, addressing your fears. You have people coming into a relationship and you're afraid to live in the house by yourself. And if you're married because you have a fear of being alone, chances are you're going to marry the wrong person, because you just need a body in there for you, regardless. So there's work to be done. And I think that people need to kind of take time out to do the work and contact me. That's what I do.
Absolutely. And I'm going to a more of a bare bones question. Yeah. And this question is concerning more about building strong networks within our lives. We all know that for marriages back in the day, it was all about connecting families together and building a strong network and a team of people around that are, for many, many reasons, whether it be economic, whether it be spiritual, whatever. Not only in marriage, but in everyday life, How important do you believe building a strong network is, and how can we, as African Americans, learn how to build networks and build relationships with people?
Okay, and that's a good question. I do remember talking about that. A strong network is most important, as a strong network equals resources and connections. Resources and connections is what you get from resources. So how do we maintain that? You get connected with resources and things that you may not have never, ever encountered. And I'll use, for example, how I met you. That was a network. There were resources there with almost every aspect of your life that a person could, could grasp and take part of and get from that. But I think people are not motivated enough to change their lives. And what we're finding with these networks, when you host an event and you have thousands of people in this population and 100 shows up, that's an example of what's happened in our community and things that we need to do if we're going to create the change that we want and improve the next generation.
I have I have a question for you. Can you make a direct correlation between, let's just take Jacksonville specifically, the northwest side, whether that be Durkeeville, Moncrief, Myrtle, versus, say, Oakleaf, Mandarin, Queens Harbor? We talk about resources. Is there a direct correlation between those areas having resources and having better relationships? Or are the people in those communities, do they have more of a priority about doing other things versus having strong relationships? So in other words, what I'm asking is, in those communities that have good schools, access to fresh fruits and vegetables, medical care, a social equity, and networking that you're talking about with business people and other folks who have strong relationships, at least on the surface, versus other areas, is there a direct correlation between we're going to have better relationships in these communities that have more resources? Would you make that correlation, so to speak?
I don't know the areas that you've spoken of because I'm so new to Jacksonville, but what you're saying probably resembles so many other communities that are occupied predominantly by, in terms of demographics, by African American communities. So one of the things, I think one of the questions, one of my answers there where I talked about, the impact of where we have been. So we're still looking at some side effects, if I may use that term, to where we've come from as a people. So if you go back, I think one of the biggest problems that we have in our community is that we don't have a community that teaches. We don't have communities that are building. We have community that are carrying on a lot of disparity that, you came out of. So when we start talking about where we come from as a people, the release of slavery, and everybody knows what Juneteenth was all about because we know by the time the last state where slaves realized they had their freedom. I did a talk to one university during June when this happened. And what I discovered that I didn't even know, that even at that time, how they continued to work. And then during the Civil War, blacks were incorporated. So a lot of black men left home. And before that, they were involuntarily snatched away and separated. So the foundation that we've needed in our communities, we haven't had that. And if you think about it, even as some of those, my parents stayed together, but my father did not know much at all about his manhood and being responsible. So we come through, the lingering effects of all of this involuntary separation, where you had these other communities that we were talking about. Because my dad used to say you can take a boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. I don't care what side of town you move a person on. When you don't understand the power of what you have access to, you don't utilize it. So you take that situation, and then we go into, okay, slaves were freed, but even after they fought in the Civil War, You got your freedom, but we're not going to give you anything to help you move forward. We're not going to help you. You're going to make it the best way you can. So you've had a group of people who's trying to make it the best way they can. You come up to the civil rights movement during the 50s and 60s when I was born. And then by the time, Dr. King was killed in 64. So by the time you get to the 70s, we get to the social era where we have we're going to still deny access, not give you what we want, because we're going to give you the crumbs. So in order to get those crumbs, when we first started out with welfare, and they used to give this commodity food program before they had the food stamp coupons. But in order for a woman or family to receive that type of support, the man couldn't be in the home. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking the 70s now and even the 80s, so you found guys walking away because if you're being denied access to education and employment, what are you going to do to take care of your family? So you have them sitting under the tree.
And with that, this is a perfect segue to a question that I have.
So this is what you're saying. Still, we got to fix that.
1968 too, because I know people are going to be like, she got the year wrong. So I just wanted to make sure.
Because I did say 64. I did say 64. You're right. 68. Thank you for that, because I said 64. But but I'm just saying, this is where we've migrated to this point. So a lot of the skills that we need, education that we've needed, the foundation for families, blacks in this country haven't had. You take people from Africa.
You're saying it's general. It's just
it's just general. Yeah, okay. Because people from Africa, Haiti, those people who remain in their country, they have more of a cultural foundation when it comes to family. Mm-hmm. But African Americans, we lost all.
I don't believe that there. I'm sorry, Dale, but I don't believe that there was a lack of resources that we don't have today.
No, we have the resources today.
Right.
But I'm just saying that you're looking at. You're just kind of looking at the overflow. No trauma is experienced, and there's no play out of it in the future. Mm-hmm. So what happened in the culture was traumatizing. There was a lot of that was stripped. Now, depending on the age that, this generation is now, so I got some time on you guys. Some of what I'm talking about, you don't understand the effects of it. But there are still affects from that. My father didn't know how to be a man. I have brothers who have struggled with their manhood. They're better than what my father was. But my father didn't know. My father still lived in fear. There were certain places he couldn't go. He didn't have it. So we're just saying you're only talking about if you go make a generation, a decade, you're only talking since that time, 4 or 5 decades ago. It's all you're talking about. So there are some lingering effects of what we've come from, but now we have the resources. We have much greater access, and I'm a witness of that because I was a high school dropout. But we're not utilizing it to our capacity.
And what's your question, DL?
So, in terms of families that have succeeded within the Black community, and maybe even especially ones that have come from backgrounds where the resources either weren't available or weren't immediately obvious, right? So we want to kind of take away and say, like, we don't want to talk necessarily about, like, if you grew up in a nice middle-class home, then things are going to be much different than if you grew up kind of in poverty or even just slightly poor, right? But there are people who are lower economically and still have successful marriages. So what are they doing, and how can that, and is that worth, and can it be replicated? Absolutely.
It can be. And this is, and I'm not sitting here to say that everyone who came from a hard time is struggling, don't know how to have a relationship, right? Because I came from one. So we all have the capacity to create more.
Right.
But there is a large majority that have been left behind. And I think what Trace is talking about, or a question that Anthony mentioned a moment ago about certain communities, we still see a lingering effect of it. But do we have successful people? Absolutely. Right. I think, look, I am so impressed at being Black because, we had to create from nothing. When we were freed from slavery, they didn't give us anything. We're probably, even the Japanese got reparation when they bombed,
Be careful with this group. They're
Wait,
anti-reparations.
we good.
Be
We good.
careful with them.
But you know what, and it's okay. But you know what, because and it's okay because you know what I know for certain, whether groups like it or not, all of access that's been provided for any minority group was off the back of Black people who died for it, who broke the ceilings to help create laws, as Dr. King said, that everyone can have equal access. So that's who paid the price for that. So I understand why some people don't get it. And we're not talking about reparation from individuals. We're talking about a system that denied, slaved, and built this country off of the back of people and gave them absolutely nothing at the end. But they still do reparations even to Native Americans. They have treaties with them now that they get income from the government. This is not from, and people tend to think, I had a client one day, well, I didn't do anything. I didn't ask you for anything. We're talking about a system, a country that don't want to acknowledge, and even here in the state of Florida, we have a governor that don't even want you to teach the whole history.
Facts.
So when we start talking about people, Dr. King said it this way. He said, you all tell me that every man need to lift him up from his own bootstrap, but we weren't given any bootstrap to lift ourselves up from. So we fought for all of it. And, you know, you're still looking at some lingering effects of what happened, because if my father was not allowed to be a man because of who he was, because he was Black, how does he teach my brothers how to be a man? How does he be an example of what a leader is in home when he was denied that and called a boy?
You need to get your church. I'll put everything in the collection plate.
And that's kind of the genesis of my question is like, I recognize that there is a significant, trying to think of how do I want to say it? There is a large problem, right? And I know sometimes that people will go, well, that person made it, so therefore there's no problem, right? And that's not really where I'm going. What I'm wanting to know is like, okay, we've talked about the church, and we said, hey, the church is not doing what it should be doing. Society's not in a place where it ought to be, or it at least hasn't been. If it's, you know, maybe we can acknowledge that it's getting better than what it was, but so all these things have happened. So now what? Are there things that we can look at and say, hey, you know what? It's small. These group of people here have managed to have successful relationships despite all of these things. So what is is there something that they're doing that we can say, the people that we run into and say, these are the things that you ought to be doing and following, because you're not going to get it from the church. The government is still a work in progress, no matter which way you want to look at it. And you still want to have a successful marriage. So how do we get you there? Other than, and I know, like, hey, seek out some therapist, or, what would we call it earlier? Not therapist, but strategist. Seek out a strategist, because I look at it and I say, well, people still want to get married. They still want to have relationships.
Of course they do.
And if all these things aren't in place for them, I don't like the idea of, even hinting that, well, you might not be able to have one because all these obstacles are in your way. Like we still got to figure out how to get them to a point, right?
Absolutely. And look, I am like probably one of the most optimistic person that you will ever meet, because I believe everything God created has the capacity to become powerful.
Right.
So if you really know that you are created in the image of the spiritual being that you serve, then now it's just called, how do I take my power back? And how do I live in that power? Because you're right, no one has to, but not everybody get there. And the only way I can answer that question, why some people get it and why some don't, I want you to consider a family, and I'll just use your family as an example. I don't know your family, so I just use your family as an example. Okay, so in your family, you have two parents, and you have this group of children. You have dysfunctional behavior in that family that creates trauma in the home. One child grows up and say, I'm never going to do this. I'm going to be better. You have another one who grows up and decide They're afraid of the world. Things are mediocre for them. They can't do more. And you have another one who does exactly, who repeat. I do a class called Legacy Mapping to help people understand why they do what they do. So you have to, on the micro level, consider what people are as to why some succeed and some don't. So all of it is not about the macro level of life. It starts at the micro level. What am I getting on the smallest, the grassroots, the most minute area, first within my own family unit that affirms who I am? Like the young men that we were talking about earlier who's never been validated. And all of their strength and their identity is because of their muscles. But if I don't have those muscles, if I'm out on the field, who am I?
Right.
That energy that you had when you were out in the war zone make you feel, but who am I when I'm not there?
Right.
So what we're talking about now, to answer your question, which makes it even more complex, is that we have individuals. And this whole point of individuality, your own uniqueness, how you process life, the meaning you draw from your relationships, those are probably the greatest stumbling blocks, because history has proven that any person can overcome anything in their life. Nelson Mandela, they said, how did you stay in prison for 29 years, 27 years, come out and be the president? He said, prison is not your physical surrounding, but it's here.
Right.
What keeps you locked up. That's what we are. And so that makes it even more, why the means why people have to seek counseling, get help.
And to that point about Nelson Mandela being in prison for 29 years, I want to take it back to the identity of the African American community, if it's a community at all. We can have a conversation about that. But I don't believe that the history of slavery, civil rights, the social deterrents that we suffered back in the days are a deterrent today for the people that's living right now. I don't believe so. And I believe that as the generations go on and time goes on, that's going to be something that's going to be in the further recesses of people's heads.
Correct.
To the point where it's not even going to be there anymore. Because honestly, I believe that that mantra of saying you can't do this because of the color of your skin and because of slavery and the trauma, because I don't believe that today they're suffering from a trauma of what happened during slavery times or even during the civil rights times. And I think that mantra being repeated by generation to generation creates a bigotry of low expectations for the African American community, saying that it's because of this you cannot do that. Because in my mind, real quick, because in my mind, you take away all of that strife and history of a people, I don't believe it's going to have that much of an effect.
I don't think.
Because if anything, I believe that it's going to be, once you give people the resources and the principles that we were talking about earlier, that we were saying that the church wasn't bringing, or the code of ethics that we were not being taught. If you just teach them that, that's going to be the driving force behind what they're going to do today moving forward.
Absolutely. To what you're stating there is very true. And again, as I said a moment ago, I don't say that anyone can succeed.
Understood.
Everyone can succeed in life. But the question becomes, what are you being fed? Who's validated? You can succeed in life. So it's not like this stuff that happened in our past is holding us back per se. It's more of what's going on up here.
Absolutely.
That's what's holding us back. Because right now there is freedom. There is access to pretty much anything you want nowadays. But do we have the bravery, the courage to go after what we want? And that's what I find that, now I'm a mental health counselor, okay? And I understand how trauma affects people, especially when it's not been addressed. So if I have a set of traumatized parents, there are behaviors that comes along with that. Now, it ain't slavery per se, but if this is where they are and their fears or whatever were never dealt with, well, this is what they pass on to their children, because that's all we know. We're all conditioned, so to speak, just in our close environment with our home. You're conditioned to whatever's going on there. You're taught what to believe, to have confidence in yourself or not, to be afraid of the world and to go out and get what you want. So it starts there. So we go back to the nucleus family. That is really, and that's one reason I work with families, because that is where we need to start. There's nobody out there can fix situations that our community have without us first fixing it ourselves. Then we know what to go after. So it really begins with the nuclear family.
Right.
So I got a question. Then, if we want to take this, we've kind of been talking more abstract, families in general, and like a body of people. So if somebody's watching and they're like, "Hey, I think I may not be in the right mindset," right? Whether they're a guy or girl. So, in your experience, what is the number one? I think I'm going to say this right. The number one thing that a man could do or a woman could do, and I assume they're going to be different, that puts them on the right path to a successful relationship. Because I don't think there's going to be one thing that you can just do and then voila. But maybe there's one thing that can get you on the right path. What would that be if you had to narrow it down?
This may sound a little abstract, but self-identity is the pillar to successful anything. And I would encourage anyone, and I've done enough workshops when I ask, who are you? And people can tell you that they're a mother, they're a father, or they're a manager, but who really am I? Because when you understand who you are, you're going to have, Dr. Miles used to say there were five questions that the human heart must understand if they're going to be a better person, a better parent, manager, entrepreneur, whatever they are. And it starts with identity. Who am I? The second one is source. What is my source? Where am I from? Because your parents were just a passage to get you here, okay? And we thank them for that. But who am I? And you're really this giant spiritual being that you don't know who you don't know. And then the third one was purpose. What am I here for? And the fourth question was potential. What are my skills? What are my resources? What do I bring to life, to this world? And that fifth one is destiny. Where am I going? So what we find, people trying to have a healthy relationship, you haven't answered those questions. And we tend to think that we can draw meaning and happiness out of someone else, only to get disappointed. So I encourage people to, you gotta fix this.
Right.
Otherwise you keep making the same decisions.
And I feel before walking in that I believed the identity was extremely important.
Yes.
And I will say this, I have long looked and said, I used to work with teenagers, first in the church, and then I did here locally, I did mentoring with a local organization that worked with at-risk teens. And one of the observations that I've had is it feels like, or no, I don't even think it feels like, I think it actually is, young men, and that's who I have the most experience working with, they don't have, like you mentioned the coming of age earlier, they don't have a moment where you go from boy to man. And I think that's a negative thing. And I like telling the story. There's a video, and you can find it on YouTube. It's this tribe like in South America or something like that. And there's a ritual that the boys go through. They go out and they capture bullet ants, which have, they literally, the pain of a sting or a bite makes it feel like you've been shot by a bullet, right? And so what they do is the elders will go and they'll grab a whole bunch of them. They'll knock them out. It's a true story. You can go look it up, I promise. And they make a pair of gloves, and then they knock them out and they put the heads inside the gloves so that they're trapped. And then when the ants come to, the boy has to wear it for like 10 minutes. And there's like video, and the guy, there's kids, and they're just like, they're kids, basically like 17 or something like that. I don't know. And this is the moment where, you pass this ritual, you are a man. Now, I don't advocate for us sticking our kids' hands in ants. But what I think is most significant about that is what happens is the men of the tribe see you as a man, acknowledge you as a man, and expect you to act like one. And I feel like that's the real missing key, no matter what the ritual happens to be. So for me, my dad, I can tell you what happened to me. I had a habit of going to my dad, and my mom and dad, and I would say, hey, mom, hey, dad, I'm facing this thing. What do you think I should do? And I would always ask them something. And I was like 18 or something, like 17, 18. And one day my dad just threw me off totally. He said, son, you're a man now. It's time for you to make decisions, learn to live with it. It's time to act like a man. And like from that moment on, I was like, now I was still, don't get me wrong, I was still pretty juvenile after that. However, I think that was a significant turning point for me. That was like my bullet ant. I mean, if I can compare it, I mean, it's not really comparable, right? But like that was my moment where another man, a respectable man, no less, said, you're now a man. It's time to act like it and make a decision and see how it goes.
You're absolutely right. So the identity, the next thing comes along with that, there's no rite of passage. That's something we talked about early on. Did you go through one? As a young man, you had to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
You? What about
Same
you?
thing.
You had to, so, my hat's off to everyone who was, but you have a large majority of boy turning men that they never walked through that.
Right.
My brothers grew up with my father. He didn't know anything about doing some rite of passage with them. He didn't have it together. And I was a single parent. I have 4 sons. And I did the best I could. They turned out pretty good. So I guess I did pretty good. But,
Right.
They became responsible college graduate guys,
All right.
and never had to worry about them on the streets or anything.
Absolutely.
But, so they're wonderful, wonderful men. But there was no rite of passage. And I can remember them, saying the same thing that, I did some great things because I gave life skills. But in terms of manhood, there were some things they had to figure out on their own. So that's one of the big things, crucial things that's missing, especially in the Black community, because we haven't seen it live and we don't have rite of passage. I had one friend that I saw have one with her son that I attended, and where the father put his stamp on him. Most young men have never gotten that, a lot of them. Never gotten it.
And we're about to go a little bit over time, just a tad bit. But I want to ask one more question. Do you think we have one more question to ask our esteemed guest before we cut off?
No, go right ahead.
Come on with it.
Okay.
I haven't even been paying attention to the time too much. A little bit.
Because you know how we can go. We can go on forever.
Right.
Because this conversation is really engaging. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show with us to actually talk about these subjects because it's very important to us.
Especially with the reparations. You was right on time with that one.
He likes hearing about
he
it.
loves reparations. He loves it a lot. And it's not that the Libertarian Party is against reparations.
What are you?
We're just against just handing out free money. That ain't free at all. That's all.
Well, you need to tell them to give it back.
But we can go. That's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother tangent.
We're talking about relationships.
We're talking about relationships. Which it can possibly go into that. But I want to ask, do you believe that there are intergender differences in culture as it comes to the African American community? For example, Black men are on one hand tend to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit more. Look, I want a household that's efficient. I want to have my wife. I want to have my children. Things of that nature. And do you believe that in today that Black women are coming from a different spectrum out of the advent of, let's say, feminism, for example? Black women are more tending to be a little more liberal, a little bit more progressive in the way of, you know what, maybe we don't need those things. And we can kind of pretty much figure it out and see where it goes from there. And how do you think we can reconcile those two things?
I think that this is going to be funny because of the era that I'm from too, okay? Going to preach? No.
Take time.
Take time.
Because I think that a lot of Black women are doing what they have to do to succeed because they're tired of struggling. And this is no pun intended to my brothers because I love brothers, But again, when a young man has not received the validation he needed, I given an example of what it means to be a man, to get out and make it happen, he can't bring that to relationships. So what we have are a bunch of progressive women nowadays who said, I can get it myself. And, from what I see, and this is court and everything, when I, tons of cases where a lot of these young fellas don't have to do anything. Women bring them into their home. They have, babies with them, or they bring them over their children.
Mm-hmm.
They loan them money. They help them pay their child support to another woman. And I'm talking about real situations that I've experienced.
What I'm saying, what we're saying is today it can't be any better time to be a baby daddy. But go ahead.
Yeah. So what you're looking at, you have to be progressive. And I just hope and I pray that our young fellows, our young guys will become more progressive. I know they need fathers, they need mentors. Two people, I remember Michael Baston talking about how he was trying to run this mentoring program, but he couldn't find any brothers. And mentors that he was getting more white guys mentoring black boys than he were black men.
Mm-hmm.
I also remember when my third son, when I was looking for a mentor for him and couldn't find one because his father was not involved. Right. So what we created are women who had to make things happen. And that's what I would say to myself, You had to make things happen. So you have these progressive women getting education, starting businesses now, and doing what they have to do. And for some, it's like, well, they don't need us. A woman always needs love. You don't even have to match her in what you have. She just want a man who's progressive, one who's going to get out before her and make things happen. It doesn't matter who makes the most.
Progressive as in the man that actually mans up.
Yeah, who mans up and not sitting back like, what we going to do? You don't know?
I just want to say this. I agree. Probably 5 years ago, I guess I was triggered and I felt some kind of way about that narrative. But I'm a little bit older, I'm more mature, and I believe that the men who don't fit into that narrative, who are not doing it, who are just allowing for the women to do it, they need to stop walking around here,
right,
acting butthurt, because women are speaking their truth, and when they get out there and start doing it, i.e., in the community, going to City Hall, starting businesses, taking back the community, the women will come back. The woman will come back and support. If she doesn't come back and support, she's not the type of woman that you want to move forward anyway. I personally believe she will, but she's not in a space in which she can trust the black man right now because he's either doing one or two things. He's either running away from his responsibility or he's crying about what the woman says he is not. Now, hit dogs will holler, as the old folks used to say.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is I don't fit in that narrative. However, she don't know that unless she sees the consistent actions of what we're doing and other men that I'm associated with.
Absolutely.
The whole night.
Yeah, because at the whole Women Expo that I met you at, it was pretty much, it was all
You was at the Women Expo?
Yeah, that's
how we linked up.
When we were passing out the
He is single.
You know, I was, why not go there and see what happens?
What was I doing? Angry black man at the time? Is that
but think about it. Who was there, right?
Women. It was always women who were such pillars of the community.
We talked about that too.
Yeah. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, there were women who were business owners, women who were doing very well, credit repair, school teachers, homeschoolers, entrepreneurs, in the medical field. Such varied faces of women in that one space. Because women asked me, say, look, man, go to your podcast and I speak to you, all this type of stuff. Do you have the resources that we need in order to bring our community forward? And I said, ma'am, I'm just one person. I can't do nothing for you. But we have so many people right here in this one building and their, multifaceted skills and abilities can bring it all together. And this is the black community that you're looking for this whole time.
Yeah. And see, and this is what I would say, because I've seen many moons. And I'm going to say this with all due respect, because I have 4 sons, okay? And I know everyone doesn't fit into the same category. But men got to start manning up. Oh, you got a lot of young boys that need to man up. They're around here making babies and not manning up.
I can't debate that.
And a lot of them are. We got to do that. And we can't get upset over it. The truth is what it is.
And I say you're absolutely right. But these black women got to stop picking them and allowing them to become baby fathers.
So maybe each side has their own responsibility.
Both sides have their responsibility.
They all do. They all do. But let's look at it this way. You know, I love the spiritual aspect of who I am, okay?
Definitely.
So I'm this strong woman, but at the same time, I also read a scripture that says, man wants to honor me because I am as I am the weaker vessel. So a woman has to be in her testosterone level out of survival. I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times she don't want to do that.
Right.
She want love. She just want to be able to trust a man.
And be safe.
And she feel that she's trusting a guy who run this little scheme. Oh, I'm going to be here for you. I love you. And so when we say she got to stop picking him, it's hard on a sister out there now. It's not whole lot to pick, to choose from. We just need brothers. I don't know what needs to happen, but we have enough successful black men that can pull. Steve Harvey did start his boys ranch. But we have enough successful black men to go out and get these. You know how many little boys out there in the school ground, in the schools, that's totally lost, and they grow up with anger because they are missing fathers. Some of them fathers are in prison, you know, or maybe there's, you know, the substance abuse side of that. So, you know, but the woman at the end of the day, they're her children. So guess who's left holding the bag?
Right.
So she's going to struggle, or she's going to get up and be innovative and create something.
Right. So I'll go ahead and say this just in general, not to any particular community, but just in general, but definitely to the men. Because I bill myself as Liberty Dad, I have a different podcast where I kind of present this this persona, and if you will.
I love that.
And I actually, I said earlier that I have mentored here. There was an organization called Daniel Kids, and you said something earlier that I think it was you that said it, that men are in short supply in these mentorship programs. And when I went there, they said, we're dying for men. We don't have enough men. We get plenty of women, but because what they do is they'll match a man with a boy and a woman with a young girl. And so I ended up mentoring, you know, a young man who did not have a father in his life. So I will say, men, get your ass out there.
I'm telling you.
And go mentor some young men.
That's right.
And, you know, it's surprisingly not that difficult. I mean, there are some hardships. I mean, because, you know, you butt heads or whatever, and it's not your kid, and there are some challenges. But it's really not that hard, because what you're doing is you're setting an example that maybe they haven't had. And I'll give you a story, because I would go out with this young man. Sometimes I would bring him over to the house, and we would do stuff or whatever. And he asked my wife a question that, you know, seems surprising to us, but probably was very impactful to him. He said, Christy, as my wife's name, he said, Christy, when DL is out, how do you know he's not going to cheat on you? Like, that was his question. Like, he was just curious, like, how is it you can trust your husband to go out and about wherever he's going, go out and do a podcast, and he's not out with some other woman, right? And that simple question probably did a lot for him. I don't know. It's not one of those things that you can follow up and say, well, you know, how did that affect your life? Yeah, you know, he's married now. He's got a child.
Well, it said two things. It says what he's been exposed to.
Right.
So for him, it was an expectation that that's what you do.
Right.
And then he gets to see that, no, well, you don't have to do it that way.
Right.
I'm going to say this. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to reiterate this and drive this point home. My father was there for me. He was not perfect, but he didn't do a lot of complaining. He got up and he set a good example for me. When times got hard for us, I jumped my tail up and I joined the military to try to provide some stability. I do community work all the time. I want to be that role model that people talk about. I am not perfect, but I think the roles have switched. I think the men are walking around here with dresses. I think they need to take their dresses off, need to give them back to the woman. She's not going to go back to her natural, in my opinion, that feminine, that nurturing, that supportive role unless she feels safe.
That's right.
Unless she's willing to trust a guy.
Absolutely.
We do way too much, myself included. We do way too much complaining about what she's doing, and we don't round up ourselves and say, these are the things we need to do. She'll automatically come and support. She's just waiting on that. And very few women won't support, the majority of them will. They just waiting to see us do it on more of a consistent basis.
Right.
Absolutely.
My message to everybody that's listening out there, this is to the men. Men, tighten up, go out there and do what you need to do. Stop worrying about the females, especially those folks who are teenagers and folks who are in their early 20s. Get your stuff straight, and all of the other stuff will fall in place. Stop crying. Stop acting like a little hoe out here. Do what you need to do. Take care of your responsibility. And even if you falter, or even if you feel some kind of way about it, don't look to the left or to the right, as we say in the military. Take ownership of it, because at the end of the day, she'll come back and say, look, I like the fact that you took ownership and took responsibility. I can ride with you. Not perfect, but I can ride with you. Men need to boss up. And that's just the honest. I can no longer talk about her choices. That's what men are doing now. We got this red pill, blue pill where we're getting on. We getting out here and we talking about the woman made a bad choice. She picked Pookie and Ray Ray the whole nine. Cool. She may have done that because maybe she was lonely, or maybe, like you said, she was feeling some kind of way and she didn't want to carry the load. She got tired. And
she decided to believe Pookie and Ray Ray.
Right.
And
Right.
finally, you know, you can take someone at their word.
Right.
All to be disappointed that Pookie and Ray Ray is Pookie and Ray Ray. So,
Walter and Jerome, Anthony, DL, Tracy, keep doing your thing, man, and everything will take care of its place. Stop worrying about what the women do, and they're gonna come.
Because there's a whole outrage movement within the men's spaces, namely like podcasts like Fresh and Fit, Andrew Tate's, and all these type of cats. You know, they're talking about all.
Fresh and Fit is no longer.
I don't know who that is, but Andrew Tate,
but a lot of these young men, they're following these male voices, and they're creating this rift between males and females as if it's all on the female's fault, which is why all things are happening the way it is. No, it's not. We just have to take accountability for our actions and what we are doing so we can maximize our own potential and start worrying about the faults of other people, because that just creates an excuse for us to be even more degenerate as males.
Right.
What they say is, oh, they're going to be thoughts anyway. They're going to be this anyway. So why commit to one? Why do this and that third? Why be an upstanding man in society? And because they're going to be 3 or 4s anyway. So we're going to treat them like such. And there's even a section of men that are not even trying to build relationships, not even trying to do these type of things, because they have such a bad impression of what women are based off of what they're listening to these people talk about. And young men are listening to that. And so we got to step in, be present in the communities, and tell young men, look, be a righteous man of God, and things will fall into place the way they should. And then you will see the reconciliation between the sexes, between the male and the females. Just get out your outrage and look to wisdom, and then your problems will be solved. And with that, we're going to close out this show. Thank you, Miss Streeter, and plug your.
Oh,
I was gonna say, go ahead and plug your business. Yeah, I wasn't gonna do that. Yeah, but go ahead and plug your business and plug your establishment and your skills one more time for the audience so they can know where to find you.
all right. Thank you again for having me here. My name is Dr. Linda Hart, and you can reach me at lindahartstreeter.com. And I have books. I do workshops, and certainly I'm here to help you through any relationship issues you may have. Any counseling, coaching as it pertains to the individual as well as your family. If you're dealing with some sorts of conflict in your relationship, in your family, we have got to fix ourselves. You can't run from it. All the young men out there who feel that women are all of this or that, let me tell you, fix yourself, you will fix her automatically. So reach out, get help. Seek the people that you can get advice from.
Do you have a social media?
Social media, yes. Love and Relationship Matters with Linda on Facebook. And then it's just at Dr. Linda Hart Streeter on Instagram and TikTok.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is Political Bombcast once again. I'm Ronald Tracy Robinson. We have right over here
D.L. Cummings.
And Anthony Brown, the People's Champ.
Absolutely. Political Bombcast. Thank y'all for listening. Till next time.